Delighted to be able to welcome David Wentworth and Derek Fournier for our session today. Oh, we're not on the first page. Oh, Andrew. Fatal mistake. I do apologize, everybody. So, welcome to Derek.
Must have been the cat.
I would say.
I reset all the slides earlier and then I forgot. So there we go. Derek, Vice President of Training from Sonesta Hotels, and David Wentworth, Vice President Talent Platform Evangelist from Sonesta. From Shooks, I should say. Delighted to have you both here with us today, gentlemen. And I'll hand over to you.
Great. Well, appreciate it. Thank you, and good day to everybody. And we're happy to be here. And as Donald mentioned, so I'm David Wentworth, and I am the talent platform evangelist here at Skooks. So my job to get out great stories like this one, which is why I'm really happy to be joined by Derek today to talk about Sonesta's learning program. So a lot of really great information, as Donald mentioned. There's going to be quite a bit of questions for you, because we want to hear from you, understand what you're working with, and you'll see how Derek and his team have probably dealt with a lot of the same issues that your organization might be dealing with as well. So those questions are going to help us stay connected and keep aligned with the story that we're talking about here. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Skooks, we are a talent learning platform, and of course we use innovation, perseverance, and a lot of teamwork to create partnerships that are focused on our clients' success. And we do this through a platform that includes all the key elements of learning all in one, right down to even any of the languages you might need. And this is for the frontline, the corporate office, even throughout the extended enterprise. So just wanted to make sure you're familiar with who we are. But more importantly, I want to introduce you to Derek. He's a training and development executive with a love for unleashing the potential of exceptional people and teams. He's 25 years of experience and a history of successfully designing and implementing learning across global organizations. As the VP of Training and Engagement at Sonesta Hotels, he drives engagement, manages the training and development strategy for thousands of employees across over 900 properties. And if that last little bit sounds daunting, I think that's really the key as to why we have Derek talking about this, because we're dealing with a rapidly growing, very complex environment, which I think is really critical to wrapping your hands around. So with that, what I would like to do is go ahead and turn things over to Derek to get us started about the story.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. I don't know what's harder to pronounce, whether it's going to be Skooks or my last name. So Fournier is how I say it. Yes, you got it right. Yes. And so great to see everybody this morning, this afternoon. Want to thank you for having me, and hopefully over the time that we have together here, just going to share a couple of stories about things that we've learned and done to hopefully create what we term our 5-star learning program. So working in the hotel business, if you've ever stayed at a hotel, I don't think we need to ask a poll question about that, but everybody stayed at hotels, and we all know how people choose where to go these days, and it really is a lot about online reviews. And so for us, the important thing for our hotels is that they get those 5-star ratings, right, online. That's really what determines what is excellence in the marketplace. We look at that the same way when it comes to our training, right? Is that all of our employees are, whether formally or informally, rating our training program. And so we need to really make sure that we have a 5-star learning program for them in order to make them successful, and always to make our company successful as well. So I'm going to kind of walk through what we have as our kind of 5 points of our 5-star learning program. We're going to start talking a little bit about flexibility. And so, as David said, we've had a lot of growth, and we do have a relatively complex organization. If you think about hotels, they're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And so, there's a certain amount of flexibility, and we'll talk some more about that. The second piece is about growth. As I had mentioned earlier, that it's always about making sure that our talent has what they need to be successful today, but also get them prepared for tomorrow. And that's the same with the business. And then the third piece is around making sure that you capture all the training, no matter what mode it comes in. So we'll dive into that a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about coaching, mentoring, and how we leverage some of our technology to make sure that we are preparing leaders for tomorrow. And then lastly, we'll kind of touch about how we make sure that all of this is integrated within our plans and our culture. So, all right. So I think we got our first poll question here, which is, so how many different types of roles would you estimate you have in your organization?
Yeah, and this is, we're sort of just to know, and this could be however you define them. They can be, it could be hourly roles versus salary roles versus leadership roles, but distinct roles within your organization. Doesn't mean specific jobs. We don't necessarily need an employee count, but just distinct roles that you would identify within your organization. And as we were talking about this, the reason why we want to ask this question, just see what people want to come back to us with as far as responses. We thought about it that I wonder how quickly that information is readily available to people, and how maybe once given it a little thought, perhaps that number is a bit higher than you might think. And as you can see, Kevin's probably 205 plus, so we're well on our way to that that complexity.
Oh, he's 250 plus now. He's revised up. I feel you, Kevin.
There's no gift card for having the most. That's not. But
there is no prize, David, is there? There's no prize that we're going to hand over at the end. There's not an award for this, but
the prize is hard work is its own reward. So
yeah. Interesting to see. Jay's got 50 plus. Derek around 20. Seven obviously 150 plus. We're working in complex organizations now, and it's not just a simple this task or that task. It's a little bit more than that.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about, kind of three stories, just how we kind of look at the different learners with our organization. But similar to a lot of the answers that we saw there in the chat is that, it's become really complex. And if you think about it, like if you go to a hotel more than once, and when you're checking in, if they don't know that you've been there before these days, you're almost surprised, right? You're like, oh, I would have thought you would have known I've been here before, and you had a record and you kind of know me a little bit. Well, our learners kind of think the same thing. And so we have, as the slide at the beginning says, we have well over 9,000 employees just in our managed portfolio. Franchise is another whole audience, but we kind of break it down that there's a ton of different roles. And so the stories that I have here is Lisa is one of our general managers of one of our hotels. Gus is an oyster shucker. Yes, that is an actual job title in our company. He's down at our New Orleans property. And then Nadia is one of our corporate office employees. And so if you think about all those learners and roles in your organization, they each have different needs and how they are going to consume training, and also what they want for content and what they need for content. And so, if I look at Lisa and I think about, kind of our managerial kind of roles, I need a system, or I need a platform that's going to give Lisa the ability to have this personalized experience, right? Where she is going in and she's seeing things about how to manage her team, how to drive her business forward. Now, if I have that same content, look and feel delivered to Gus, he's going to be turned off completely, right? And so Gus, who works behind an oyster bar in a restaurant, he consumes all of his learning on a mobile device, right? He doesn't have a computer. He's not going to have a computer. And he's going to be interested in things about how he can serve his customers better, and things like that. And then my third audience here, I also have Nadia, right? And so she's a corporate employee. So for her, it might be about personal or professional development. And so, what, as David kind of did in my intro, right? So 25 years, I think back to where we used to be and kind of having one training content, and it's like everybody has to find their thing. Now we've got to be flexible in being able to deliver things in different ways. So whether it be mobile, desktop, or another format, we also need to be able to be flexible in content. One of my favorite questions that people ask me is like, oh, well, what gets assigned to new people? And that used to be a simple answer, right? But now it's really does vary, because in our organization, we do have well over 100 different career paths. And so the great thing is that, with our partner Skooks here, is we're able to customize everybody's learning experience, right? And so Gus and the people who are working in our restaurant only see content that applies to them. And then our professionals or manager roles, they see stuff that applies to them. And then our corporate support team sees stuff that applies to them. That being said, we also have a very open academy, meaning that we do have a lot of things that are visible to everybody. And that's just something we believe in because it keeps people interested. It also helps them to identify things that they might not know they were interested in, and also gives us a sense of people that are interested in growing. So flexibility, both in how things are delivered, but also customizing or curating that experience to learners is very important to us. The same thing goes, by the way, flexibility for the business. When I joined our company just 3 years ago, if this would have been our slide, there would have been 3 brands on this bar on the bottom. So now we have 17 brands. And so one of the things that I'm very thankful for is that, whatever you partner with when you're designing your training strategies, is it needs to be flexible to be able to meet different needs, right? And so I think we can launch our second poll now.
Yeah, and this one we're sort of taking a different tack on, right? Before we were asking about roles, now about your learning audiences, and maybe they vary. You've got different audiences by region if you operate globally, or even in different areas of one country, or if you have several brands, as you can see with would be with Derek's example here on the slide, it looks like, or just simply department responsibility, or of course it could be multiples of those, right? So maybe you've got cuts that go across 1, 2, 3, or more of these kinds of categories. Just sort of getting an idea of the complexity within your organization as far as you think of learning audiences. I just want to, again, just trying to get a sense from the audience where things are in general. But as you know, you can see from what Derek's explaining, that it's a lot of different locations, so many different roles, so many different brands, and so there's a lot of complexity to manage, and trying to see what kind of levels of complexity our audience has today.
It's interesting looking at the responses so far. So we've had about a dozen responses. There's plenty of people in the room if you'd like to vote on this, but we don't seem to have any different brand audiences. So
unless they're in that mixture of things, but yeah.
Mixed with things. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Which, so Derek, you would answer. That's what you would answer, I would imagine, on this one, given the localities and the brands.
Yeah, and I think that just reinforces, right, the need for flexibility, right? Is that, what used to be cookie cutter is, hey, we're organized by division, we're organized by brand, we're organized by geographical area. Now there is this kind of mixture of things, right? And so that's what, we started to look at. Oh, okay, well, franchise, but then it's, well, franchise in a different country is different than franchise, here. And so there's a whole lot of ways that you need to now think about cutting your audience, right? Because we have this mixture of things. The department responsibilities is still, as is noted here, is definitely one of the ways that we slice and dice things too. So a finance department or an operational department responsibilities, certain learning is served up to them, that's catered to them. And so it gives us the flexibility, though, that if we add something in that we hadn't really planned on, that mixture of things, that we have the flexibility to be able to deliver that and think about that differently. So yeah, Kevin, oyster shucker is definitely not something that you see a lot on cover letters. So Gus has been, he is actually a champion oyster shucker in New Orleans. He's been shucking oysters at our hotel for over 40 years. So if you ever go to New Orleans, you got to go. Um, so the second part of our 5-star is growth, right? And so growth starts with our people, right? And so we look at, do we provide two things? One is, do you provide what your team needs to be successful today, whatever that role is? And, you know, we talked a little bit about, you know, the different kind of roles, but do we make sure that everything is focused first on what they need to be successful today? And so, you know, there's a number of pictures here of different types of roles in our organization, but, you know, we have frontline employees. And so for us, that's our guest facing employees, but you have, I'm sure, whether it be frontline employees or it could be salespeople, right? And so, do they have all of the tools and the information and knowledge and skills that they need in order to be successful today? And then the second part is going to be, have we given them a path to show them how to get to the next step in their career too? So, you know, one of the things I wanted to talk about here was just the importance of skill verification, at least in our business. I often tell the story about, you know, housekeepers. And so we have a certain way that beds are made at Sonesta, probably similar to a lot of other hotels, you know, where they tuck it in real tight there so your feet get stuck in the bed. So there is actually a technique to being able to make the Sonesta bed. And so I tell people, I'm like, yeah, it's great. We have a wonderful little training video that shows housekeepers how to make the Sonesta bed. But ultimately, what I need to know is that, can somebody verify that learner can actually do it the way that we want to? And so there's always this observation and importance about skills and verification of skills. And so we highly leverage our on-the-job skills techniques, and we leverage the Skooks platform a lot in that. So being able to have somebody say, "Yep, I've watched them make the bed," or for our salespeople, "Yeah, I've gone on a sales call with them and they executed it the way that we want to," or it's a end of the month financial process, and yes, they've completed it successfully, because the online training gives them the knowledge, but ultimately it's about, do they apply that knowledge in the way that is going to impact our guests and our business? And so we leverage that a lot, because, you know, training and knowledge is great, but being able to perform is ultimately what we want to be able to give business results. And so we leverage our on-the-job skills a lot, because we are in a business that's very much not tied to a computer. And so we do a lot of on-the-job verifications as well.
Yeah, and you know, that's critical. I think that and it's missed a lot, is you can think that your training is the best there is, but there's this assumption that it's good enough, that as long as somebody finishes it, then they know how to do the thing that they were trained on doing, and it's just a given that they will now go do that. And I think it's really important to make sure that check, and it isn't so much it's a performance check, but it's also, is the training really addressing the things that we think it is, and people are able to do what we're asking them to do.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's one of the things. Completion is not the goal, right? That
Right.
is not what we're after here. What we're after is, are they able to use that information in the way that we want? So the same thing goes, by the way, for growth for the business, right? Is that as a you know, growing business, is your learning strategy going to make sure that you are supporting that? And I think we have, I think our next poll.
Mhm. Yep. And just a general question. I mean, it's pretty open-ended here to discuss, you know, but any growth or expansion plans for the rest of this year. And it's important to, first of all, we're in a very interesting time as far as expansion and contraction with businesses. There's just a lot of both happening. So just interesting to see what's happening with our audience here. But in my experience talking with organizations, as they try to make plans with technology and with learning strategies, sometimes the idea of what the company's going to look like in 12 months isn't really being taken into account. Everything's being looked at through a snapshot of what's happening right now. And it's really important to understand what do we think the business is going to look like, 6 months, a year, 2 years from now.
Yeah.
I think I was just going to add what I think is interesting in your the question here is it's what's growth expansion plans. So this is actual defined activity. So it's not just we will wait and see what happens. There is some active activity supporting this. How are we going to take this forward?
Yeah, and growth for the business, certainly. I see some folks, no growth and limited all the way up to substantial growth. And so the plans are certainly very important, and making sure that you have, that was kind of ties into the last slide about making sure that you have plans to support that growth. And so, we had a story that's certainly extremely unique in our growth, that we actually went from 58 hotels to 1,200. And that sounds a little crazy, but it actually is what happened and it was through acquisition of some major franchise organizations. But the reality is that even before then, it was really about making sure, okay, we know that we're going to be growing. And so what do we need to do as a business in order to prepare for that growth? And so that for us, we knew we were going to launch some new brands. And so it might not be brands for you. Maybe it's a product line. Maybe it's a new customer segment. But there will probably be something that your business, if you're looking at growing, is going to target. If you don't have growth plans in terms of expanding your business, you certainly want to grow your people to be more successful within your business. So that's another area of growth, is that even though it might not be growth within, we always find that it's best to prepare our internal talent to grow to the next role so that we have that strong bench of succession planning within our organization. And so that's also the growth that we're looking at, is that how do we make sure that we're prepared? Because I think, in a lot of places for sure, training and talent is scarce these days. And so the business needs to be prepared because, a lot of times there's more roles than there are people. And so making sure that you are growing your talent is certainly one of the things that you hear all the time about the importance of that for the team. So, so the next, I want to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the different modes of training. And so why don't we launch the next poll?
Yeah, it's again trying to see what the state of the state is here with our audience, and just this is a select all, so you can select any that apply. But curious to know what modalities you currently use, and as we were setting this all up, Derek and I were talking, and there's an interest to see, especially with in-person training. Throughout my career of doing research in this area, in-person training was always the number one way that training was delivered for the longest time, and by far the number one. And then of course we hit 2020 and that changes dramatically. And so it's interesting to see now, 3 years on, how things have sort of leveled out and come back around. And I think we can start to see, just even though it's a relatively small cross section, but we could see that it is not completely off the map by any means.
Yeah, and so it looks here we got a pretty balanced response rate here. So
it's also interesting to see we got peer-to-peer in the comments box, in person side by side, so two people commenting. It's Magdalena and Jay, thank you for that. And also coaching I see is in there as well, which we're going to come on to shortly, Derek, as well. But just interesting to see the mix and the blend is. We seem to be doing a bit of everything everywhere, all at once kind of thing, isn't it? It's the to quote an Oscar movie.
So yeah, and so one of the things I encourage you is to make sure that you're capturing all of that learning, right? Is when I joined Sonesta, one of the things that our head of HR had said was, yeah, well, we do training one way, we don't do a ton of it. And shortly into my tenure, I was like, actually, we do a ton of training. We're just not capturing all of that. And so, all of those responses, about podcasts, about the hip to hip or one-on-one in-person, kind of coaching, making sure that you're capturing all of that so that when it happens is really important. So, even this week, like I said, we had a call that people were learning about a new system, and in the past that would have been a webinar and a kind of one-off, and then it's like, oh yeah, I remember we did that. But if we can capture all of those learning activities and make sure that people can note those, then we have a much better picture of where people are at. So we have even the ability for people to kind of upload when they do that training. So if somebody is doing a podcast, they can actually say, hey, I attended this podcast. Here were the topics. Here's what I learned about. Because all of that stuff adds up. And people don't just learn, right? I mean, we certainly do the things that were in our poll question. We launch e-learning classes. We do formal, as you can see the picture here, we do formal in-person training. We do virtual classrooms as well. But there's a lot of other things that happen in our hotels. And so going back a little bit to some of the skills pieces, our front desk people, roles like that, a lot of that training happens standing side by side, with a trainer, and that's a great way for people to learn. We just need to make sure that we're capturing what they're training, and it's better for everybody, right? So that way, the next person who's going to be working with that employee, they know, okay, here's everything that this person knows so far. And so, that's definitely one of the keys, is being able to capture all of that learning in an easy way. So, I'd love to know how you capture and roll out the on-the-job assessments. Yeah. So, I'm gonna harken back to my first point about flexibility. We do it in a couple of different ways. So, one is, and I'll give a little plug, David, to Skooks here. One of the things we love about the platform is that they make it super easy for on-the-job checklists. And so there's literally a way for us to just put in, hey, I learned how to make the Sonesta bed the right way. I learned how to clean the room the right way. I learned how to do a sales call. And it's literally a checkbox. As we said, a lot of our employees are deskless. So the phone and having them just be able to literally click a button on the things that we want them to do. We also have a lot of people who still, I harken back to my Gus story, right? He might be doing a checklist on a piece of paper still. And so if he's doing that, great. There's the ability for them to upload that so that we know that those skills are taken. So we're flexible in how we allow people to do that too. And so even our e-learning modules, again, as you can imagine, in our hotels, we have some hotels that have big staffs. They like to do things in meetings and groups. And so we might launch a module to everybody in the company. But if a hotel decides, hey, we're going to do this as a group, great. They do it as a group. We're able to upload who was there, what they went through, so that we can still capture all of that stuff. So it does go to that flexibility. But yeah, so oh boy, Magdalena, sorry if I butchered your name. Yeah, it's either right through the platform that there's a series of checklists, or there's the ability for them to still use paper and pencil, and it's an upload, but it allows us to capture it different ways. So so learners check the checklist, not an observer. Again, one of the great things that I love about it is that we can design it any way we want. So we can have it that only the learner has to check. We can have it that only the trainer has to check, or we can have both of them. And so we have different ways, depending upon the skills that we're looking at, that we design that. But yeah, it really does depend, right? Because there's some things where we said we want both the learner and the trainer to be able to say, the learner say, yep, I know how to do this. The trainer say, yep, I know how to do that. There might be some other things where we're just interested in the trainer saying, yes, I've seen them do that. And then there's some skills that we say, just the learner says, yep, I know how to do this. So it really depends. So yes. And Laura, yes, Skooks is an LMS. So okay, so we've talked a little bit about on-the-job training and mentorship / coaching, and so I wanted to kind of move into talking a little bit more about how we've been successful in this arena. And so we actually have another poll, I believe. Yes.
Yeah. And just to get a sense of if there's any coaching and mentoring going on in your organization, and then maybe what that looks like. Is it a formal program that is set up strictly for coaching and mentoring? Maybe it's happening at the manager level, right, without the need for an organization-wide program, or the individuals and the managers are the ones that they can go out and find external coaches. There's an allowance for that. Maybe there's nothing that you're aware of at your organization, or maybe there's something else that we hadn't thought of or couldn't fit on the list that you'd like to share with us about the way your organization approaches coaching and mentoring. We'd love to hear about it if that is the case. But we're seeing a massive increase in interest in these kinds of approaches, because it's always been seen as so effective. These coaching and mentoring relationships from a learning perspective, super effective, but historically have been challenging given the sort of high touch, complex nature of them, and which is kind of great, Derek, about the way you're going to talk about how you guys manage it in this kind of environment. But you can see here, for the most part, in our audience, there is some form of coaching and mentoring going on in the organization.
Yeah. Yep. And yeah, looks like we have all of the above, which tends to happen in organizations. And I will say that, we kind of have a mixture ourselves. And so the formal program that we have is something that we have launched in the past year and a half. And so we kind of looked at, okay, so in our first, dipping our toe into the formal mentor program was we were trying to solve a specific business problem. We needed more general managers. We needed more people prepared to be general managers of a hotel. And so what we looked at was, okay, we definitely have general managers. And like I said, a lot of those programs where the boss is the person who is mentoring that person one-on-one, but it wasn't quite getting us where we wanted to. And so we said, okay, can we look at this a little differently? And what if we did have still this one-on-one mentorship format, but we did it virtually, or a mixture of virtually. So what we did was we paired people, and it really didn't depend on their location. We have some people that it is, one-on-one, and it's with their boss and they're in the same place. We have other people who, there's a gentleman who's in Houston, Texas, and his mentor is in Hawaii, right? And so they're about as far away as I am from you today. But what we did was we gave them a structured program and said, okay, here's the skills that a general manager needs to have to run a hotel at Sonesta. And here's some online learning that will help you to develop the knowledge you need, and then they connect virtually to kind of go over the skills. And so it is kind of it leverages a lot of different processes. One, there is a online learning component, so they will go through a series of online learning modules to learn some knowledge. There's a coaching, which is done mostly virtually. And so they'll spend an hour or so a week with their mentor, just kind of talking through some of the skills that they're learning, setting up activities, and then they do a lot of on-the-job training on their own. I will say, that we found that the people that are successful at this, they have to be committed. So these are your people who are your high potentials, people who are interested in moving their careers, because the person who is being mentored or coached, they have to take an active role in making sure that they are working to complete skills and learning on the job. But at the same time, it gives us visibility across our organization to be able to see where the talent is. And so, if we have somebody who is ready in one of our locations, and maybe there's not a role for them, there might be another job somewhere else. We've also seen success with this on a more informal, I guess, which is where managers are really coaching their employees, and then really kind of letting us know the skill level that those people have and areas where we might be able to leverage those. And so people have moved laterally as well within the organization, but it's really around getting their skills built up. One of the other side benefits of this is, as we said, increases the networking and collaboration that people that normally wouldn't have talked and look at things differently now are kind of solving problems together. And so we've seen some great success in connecting people that probably wouldn't have been connected, and now they can each help each other. But it's been a successful way for us to formalize a little bit more. We're expanding even more. I will say this is a newer area for us, but we've had success with it. And so now we're looking at some of our engineering roles, some of our more junior roles, and can we kind of mimic the same thing so that we can have multi-layers of this. So I did want to just pause because I saw, Carl, your question. I'm going to go back a little bit. I just wanted to get through this mentorship piece, but the bed making example, watching a video and then presumably assess another person can make the bed. I'm left wondering the value of the video. So yeah, so as you grow, one of the most important things is consistency, right? Is that we need to make sure that that bed is made the same way in all of our hotels. What happens is if you don't have the video, so the video is used in two ways. One is we're positive that everybody at least sees the right way to make it. Because if we don't have that video, if the housekeeper in one of our hotels says, oh, well, here's how I do it, then suddenly that becomes the standard, right? But if we have the video, at least we know that when they started and when the new person starts, and they can say, well, that's not what the video said, right? And so there can be that check and balance piece. The second thing is that over here for sure, and certainly in hospitality, as I started off, we're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. My trainer doesn't have a lot of time. They are actually cleaning rooms, right? It's not like we have a trainer and they're just sitting there waiting for new trainees. They're a housekeeper, trainer, manager. And so they're also making the bed. And so what I want for our learners to do is they can watch the video and see how to do it by themselves. I don't need the trainer there to do that. And so rather than the trainer having to spend 20 minutes going over, okay, here's how you do this, da da da. My trainee can watch the video. They come in and they can say, okay, now as you saw in the video, they can compress that time to probably half. And now they know that the trainee's already seen how to do it. They might have taken a short quiz about how you fold it under. So now that time gets compressed and it's more high value time. And so it's a small example that becomes more important with other things, even as far as, like I said, front desk. It's like if I can get them up to speed on how to check in virtually using a little simulation of our software, then when they go to work with their trainer, instead of them spending 2 hours going over the computer, now they can just spend an hour with them because they already got that piece ahead of time. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it's all about that. It's also in line with the coaching and mentoring relationships, is ensuring that those interactions are valuable, right? That we're spending that time talking about things that matter rather than things that didn't need to escalate to a one-on-one session. So, all that, trying to leverage the technology to the best we can, so that when we do use these one-on-one high-touch interactions, that they're super valuable and meaningful. I think that's a great point.
Yeah. So the last piece that I kind of wanted to talk about was about your learning and making sure that it fits with your culture. So I think we have our last poll.
Yep.
This
Yeah,
might not have been something you thought about.
right. But definitely something we're interested to hear about is the idea of, if you think about your learning environment in general, not one particular program, but in general, the way learning is delivered, the environment in which it occurs, does that match your organization's culture? And so it could be, yes, 100% completely aligned, overlap, but could be better. Maybe there doesn't reflect it. Or if you have some other opinion about what's going on in your organization, feel free to share that with us as well, too.
I'm really interested to understand how, if a learning environment doesn't reflect the organizational culture, how learning happens, because the learning culture within the organization will be a part of the whole organizational culture. So interested to see the results. Pretty clear they overlap, but they could be more closely matched, I think, is the general response from the people who are in the room here today.
Mm-hmm.
And I would answer the same one if I answered this poll too. I'd love to answer they are completely matched, but it's always a learning process and a work in progress. So one of the things that our company, we talk about is we have this thing we call the culture of caring, right? And so that's a piece that's very ingrained within our company. And so one of the things that we make sure is that our learning environments kind of match and reflect that. As I had said earlier, one of the things we leverage a lot is the on-the-job checklist, and a lot of that hip-to-hip training that it sounds like a lot of people here also leverage. And part of that is being in the hospitality business. We call it, we are kind of people. And so if we had a learning environment that was very static, did not feature a lot of people, did not feature a lot of things about caring and about how to treat people. And so, everything from the aesthetics of the academies, as we said, we have 17 brands. And so each one of those brands kind of has its own little culture too. And so being able to make sure that that people feel that when they are being trained in our organization. And so for us, that does mean a lot of that on the job and that trainer playing a key role. But then also the activities that we have people do need to reflect that culture too. We do, there's a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion stuff. Our industry is extremely diverse. And so, we make sure that it matches what our organization says and feels. And there's different cultures, as I said, too. So we have some hotels that are resort hotels, and so they have a little bit more of a resort kind of culture. And then we have some that are business hotels. And so even how we deliver and serve up content needs to be catered to match those cultures. And so we're always thinking about, does this fit with our culture of caring? Does this seem like it works? One of the things that was a surprise or I had to learn was that mobile was not a part of our culture in terms of learning. And so we're still trying to figure out if that's the right path. I came from a previous company, was a logistics company. And so a lot of it was truck drivers, and they were all mobile. They were just used to that. And so that was the culture, was that, hey, we're truck drivers, we're on the road, we use our phones for everything. And so it was like, okay, so then we have to design something that meets them where they are and kind of fits that. And I think about, the look and the feel of that learning environment versus where I am today, and it's 100% different. And each of them were successful, I think, because you looked at the culture and how you could best match that. So something that's important, I wish I would have learned earlier in my career, as I think you had said, Andrew, was that how learning happens if they don't match. It's really hard if they don't. So, and then, the other part, which I think we've talked a little bit about too, is being strategic and it fits your business plans. And although we were planful, we certainly didn't plan on having this many brands and segments and everything else. However, we know now that, okay, our growth is going to happen in certain areas with certain types of things. And so we need to make sure now that our learning strategies are going to support the business growth where it's going to be. So in our example, it happens to be franchising. And so we're looking and putting some more resources because we know that that's where there's going to be growth. It could be a product line. It could be a department. And you're like, oh, this is, our sales department's going to take a much bigger role over the next 12 months. And so making sure that you have training that's going to support whatever your strategic goals are for the year. And so, yeah. So with that, I think that I am done. David, I'll let you put some last words in, and then we can see if there's other questions.
Yeah, just please, if there's any more questions, use that question box and get them to us. We'd love to hear from you. Actually, it's not necessarily an observation for me, but a question for you, Derek. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but some of the things you mentioned. What's always interesting to me is this kind of environment. You deal a lot with franchises, obviously, and so what so most people are familiar with that model. But the idea is that and that's my question: is what would you say the breakdown is between franchised locations across all the brands versus what is actually owned by Sonesta? Would you have any ballpark of what that breakdown might be?
In terms of our business split?
Yeah, so the locations, are there locations that are owned? Because what I'm getting at is, does that then feed into some of the challenges, right? Working with this vast, complex array of different owners versus some organizations where, well, we're the company, we own everything, and everything happens this way.
Yeah, it's completely different, right? And so so about 3/4 of our locations are franchise locations, and that's new within the past year and a half for us. And so completely different audience, right? And everything in terms of managed things, you have a little more control over, and you have to use a little more influence on the franchise side because ultimately it's somebody else's business. And so so we definitely take very different approaches, and it's a different culture to that last slide too, right? And so you have to serve up different things for that audience as well.
Yeah, I mean, you take your example of, well, this is the way we do it, right? You get that a lot in this chain, and now multiply that by X, right? Because you've got all these different owners and they have sort of their different views on how things are. So the idea of how do we create a level of standardization, but still allowing for, because it's a franchise model, for people to operate in that. So I just wanted to ask about that because, that just adds to the layers of complexity. That's what's so fascinating about what you guys are doing, is just how complex it is. You look at the roles, you look at the locations, you look at the brands, and keeping it all straight. So I think the reason why it's such a great story is people who hear it maybe have complex organizations, but maybe not as complex as yours, and see that it can be done at this level. So I appreciate that. One other question for you: this 5-star approach. I love the analogy. The idea that it literally is these 5 points on a star that you're focusing on, but the 5-star review, it's a phrase that you hear in that hotel industry, 5-star experience. Is that also internal for the learning program? Do you brand it internally as 5-star, and do your employees make that connection?
So We don't formally, right? So I will say that all of our online courses, we do have a rating, the 5-star rating, so that people rate all of our courses. And so that is intentional, so that, there is kind of that thing of making sure that, hey, which one of our courses are not hitting the mark. And our employees are certainly used to that. We
Hmm.
don't brand it the 5-star learning, kind of
Yeah.
process. But now you've got me thinking a little here today too. So
Yeah, it's definitely an industry, if you latch right onto it, that people are looking for that 5-star experience, whether it is a resort or a business location, they still want that same, that same level. So, yeah, I love the way you put that together. I'm looking and seeing for any other questions that may.
I have a question,
Yes.
if that's possible, Derek. So,
yeah.
sorry, David. So, Derek, I'm interested in use of their own devices. So, are your employees expected to use their devices to access this stuff? And how is that impacted on sort of like the culture within organizations if they are?
Yeah. So a very tricky, as always, kind of question. And so I will say that culturally at Sonesta, people don't use their devices a lot. Some of them do prefer, and we find it tends to be the younger generation who is used to using their phone for everything. Um, but we definitely we strongly encourage them only to use it within their working building, right? We don't want people to have to go home and feel like they need to take training outside. Um, we have not gone so far, that we have the ability to kind of lock things so that they can only access it within the 4 walls. We haven't gone there yet, but we're very clear, both with our managers and with our employees, that we want them training as part of our responsibility to them, and so they need to do that during their working hours and within the building. And like I said, it is kind of fascinating that my last company, everybody used their devices, and that was just how they operated. Here, not so much. So I would say that we have the availability for people to use devices that we have within our hotels if they'd like, and then if they choose to use their own, they certainly can.
Excellent.
Yeah.
You'll see that we've posted in the resources section or notes section on the left-hand side of the screen. There's contact details for David and contact details for Derek as well, both their emails and LinkedIn profiles. We've also posted a link to a page on Skooks. Can't get my teeth into that. I do apologize, everybody. On Skooks, looking at there's 3 elements on that page. If you go to it, learning transformation infographic, a real world learning for frontline workers paper, and also a Fosway franchise training viewpoint paper as well, which is a highly recommended read as well. Just checking for any other comments. So Jay just said, thanks for mentioning that EU's training mostly within their working buildings. That's really interesting. Yeah, we've been noticing sort of like post lockdown is that merging of work-life balance and that actual learning work-life balance. And actually it's a 3-way balance now, and the expectation on people to learn in their own time for workplace activity. So it's interesting that you've picked up on that. Yeah, really interesting. The one other question I have for you, which is again, sorry, from me, because I think it's a really interesting one, is that you're working in such diverse fans, such diverse organizations. In terms of learning design, then, are you thinking, the employees who are, skill side first, who are out and about actually, interacting with customers and so on, or are you thinking of, the people who work probably a step away from customers, so the back office roles more? How do you balance that in terms of your design, Derek?
So so I would say that personally, I always am thinking about, who's the people who are touching our guests, right? And so they're the ones who are bringing the money in, and so boy, do we got to make sure that they're giving that experience. But but at the same time, you know, kind of those supporting roles are the ones that set those people up for success. And so I would say that that's actually kind of how we split it too, right? So I do have somebody on my team who really focuses on, I would say, more the support, right? So the management roles, and hey, let's make sure that we have the best bosses in the industry and giving them the tools that they need to do that. And then I have somebody else who's really focused on those kind of frontline things. And I think that you do have to, they're different audiences, but they're both important. So you have to really make sure that you're thinking about both of those. And, you know, I would also say that we compartmentalize them enough so that, you know, because I didn't always have somebody who did both of those things. And so it was like, okay, I'm going to focus on, you know, those front roles for this quarter, and then I'm going to focus on the next quarter. I think you do have to have, you can't lose sight of either of those, because if you lean too far in either one, you're not going to be successful. And so it's making sure that you're giving time to both. But we definitely are always designing first, thinking about those people who are touching our guests.
Awesome. So we're up to time. Thank you, David and Derek, particularly as well. Lots of really useful, interesting information there, and thank you to our audience as well. Some good questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, interactivity. Like I said, the contact details for David and Derek are in the box that's on the left-hand side. Recording of this webinar will be available from tomorrow, and you will get that link sent through to you. It just leaves me to say thank you again, David, Derek, for your time today, and really thank you to, like I say, clicked on the wrong box. Thank you, everybody else, again, for all of your time today. Really do appreciate it. I will stop the recording